years later, people would come up to me in a random hotel lobby in Washington, D.C. and say, I remember you from your coverage in Kosovo, or I remember you when. And that is a privilege because it maybe they remember me, but I think I like to believe that they remember the story. I like to believe that they remember that I really loved character driven stories and I loved exploring the why behind what was happening at any given time. You know, anybody can tell you the what, but to explore the why is the most, intriguing aspect of journalism, I think. And you mentioned so many stories, and it's true. Sometimes you don't even know the significance of where you're standing in any given moment. You're just trying to cover the story. And when it's a big story, there's incredible competition. And what I remember, for example, was, one of the stories that I covered was the Columbine shooting. So, the story broke. We largely initially take local news coverage to air while we get on planes and move crews out to that location. And I knew that I would be field anchoring, sitting in a chair in the snow with a crew, anchoring for 6 hours at a stretch right outside the school. And I remember, there's the emotional aspect of the story and sitting in a place where something so horrific had happened just feet away. And then there's just the quirkiness of the business itself. So the story is huge and it's emotional. And I had to brace because the initial interviews that we were going to be doing were with eyewitnesses and the police officers who walked through those hallways and saw the bodies of kindergartners. So you have to I had to steel myself for that. But then there's just the craziness of the business itself. So, we have editorial producers, they're called guest bookers, and they're the ones who are responsible for identifying the people who are going to be the best voices, eyewitnesses to the story. People who are reading When News Breaks, it's interesting that their commentary was, I love seeing how it used to be. I love, that view into an old school newsroom, in addition to the relationships and the love story that are in the book. But, for me to think, oh my gosh, basic 101 journalism news gathering is now old school. So I just wanted to make mention of that because I think people who remember, as you do, I think, you're the target reader, right, for When News Breaks, who remembers what it was like, which frankly wasn't that long ago. So CNN, oh, super fun. Like that was such a great place to work because ABC News, it had its target evening program with World News Tonight with Peter Jennings, which was only 22 minutes long without commercials, right? So it only had room for a maximum of 4 correspondents on the show on any given night. One was going to be from the White House. The other one's going to be from Capitol Hill. And then you've got 2 other stories. So correspondents like me were competing for those 2 time slots, those 2-minute 30 slots in each evening broadcast. And you could go weeks or months without ever seeing any airtime. And there's a scene in the book where I describe my very first story for World News Tonight. After it took me about, I don't know, probably about 2 or 3 months before I actually made air. They're paying me a salary and I'm pitching stories. And finally I get my big break, and script approval was just agony because it was part of the hazing process of making it onto World News Tonight. I go to CNN, and yes, I'm an anchor, but I'm an anchor among many, right? And the news is still the star. But as an anchor, I could also break away for the big stories. So there were no more live shots telling you that it was raining and how many car accidents there were going to be. They were all going to be big stories. So I could anchor the morning show. I took a heavy hand in the guests that were getting booked for my show. I split those guest interviews with my co-anchor, Leon Harris. But we worked as a team and it was super dynamic and every day was different. And then when the big story broke, I could be there boots on the ground, and it was the best job in the world. There's an executive I mentioned in the book, Eason Jordan, who had been there from the very beginning, incredibly talented. And when I interviewed with Eason, and I remembered him from my intern days back in college, and I said, why did you stay, in an industry where most people move every 3 to 5 years? And he looked at me utterly baffled. And he said, well, we're CNN and we do the news and that's all we do. So when it was a decision at the time whether I was going to stay at ABC News and be the newsreader on Good Morning America, pretty high profile position, or whether I was going to go to a cable network, which only had what 70% penetration in the nationwide audience at the time, because not everybody has cable. Where would I go at this critical juncture in my career? And when Eason said that, I knew, this was going to be the place. And I never looked back. It was an incredible experience. What you're doing is you're preparing for every contingency, right? So even when I prepare for a live interview, 98% of my research and questions are going to go out the window, right? But when you have a story like the counting of Chads, and you're waiting for this seminal event, which will be historic, and setting precedent for generations to come. It is, it's that adage that they say about the military, hours of boredom for moments of glory. But when the news breaks, it's incredible. And working for an organization like CNN, and I still have faith that these are still the ways that things are done behind the scenes, it is a well-oiled machine. So when you're working in a cable news newsroom, they live for breaking news. That's what they're wired to do. It's the slow days that become difficult because you're trying to think of all these sidebar stories that are still relevant to the main event. But when the news breaks, that's when you feel the energy in the newsroom, and it's like no other. It was that way. I tried the best that I could in the book to describe that morning of 9/11 and how things unfolded. At the time, we didn't know any more than you did. We only knew what we saw. And in When News Breaks, I think it's like chapter 12 or 13, I wanted to give you the behind the scenes. I wanted you to feel what it was like on this incredibly slow news day. So I just described its agony. The lead story that day was whether Michael Jordan should return to the NBA. And then the second story was the renovation of the Capitol building. I mean, really sexy topics that were going to keep eyeballs glued to the screen. And it was, everybody remembers that day as being unusually sunny and the skies blue wherever we were. People remember the weather that day, unusually clear. And so we were more preoccupied in the newsroom about the changes that were happening at the network because competition was getting fierce, and all the morning shows were stepping up, and MSNBC was making its mark, and Fox News was in full bloom. And so the network was making decisions about our morning show, my show, and therefore my future. And I was co-anchoring that day. They were auditioning a golf anchor from CNN Sports Illustrated, our sister network, Vince Cellini, the unsung hero, because he's never mentioned on the anniversary of 9/11. I'm the one who gets the attention, but Vince was doing yeoman's duty auditioning as a news anchor. They wanted to see if his charisma and his, terrific sports patter, that ad-libbing skill that they have would really add to the chemistry of a morning news show. So Vince was auditioning for the newsroom on the morning of 9/11. He was my partner in the seat. So I'm thinking, all right, is this really the competitive team that's going to go up against Fox and MSNBC? And I had my doubts, not because of our abilities, but because of the commercial landscape was changing. So we were also experimenting with trying to bring the audience into the newsroom experience. So we had different remote positions throughout the newsroom where I would stand and do interviews and whatnot. And I was standing in one of those remote positions about to interview Amy Tan about her new cartoon series, Sakwa, on PBS, when all of a sudden there's an executive running through the newsroom. So Jake, for all that we've talked about, in terms of newsroom dynamics, you never see people run through the CNN newsroom. Breaking news is all CNN did. She ran by me and I said, "What's going on?" And she said, "Unconfirmed reports of a plane hitting the World Trade Center." So I'm thinking, small plane, right? Horrible story, lives lost to be sure, but another breaking news story. So then I start getting instructions in my earpiece, get to the set, we're going to go into rolling coverage. Not unusual and kind of exciting, like, great, we're going to throw out the scripts, the teleprompter's going to go blank, and we're just going to fly by the seat of our pants. And that's where I, as the anchor, have full faith and confidence in this incredible newsroom behind me, because I'm nothing without that team, right? I'm just going to be the funnel through which they push the eyewitness interviews and the phoners, the people on the phone telling us what they're seeing and whatnot. So I get back up to the set and I look in the desk monitor, which is the preview monitor. We're in a commercial break right now. And I see the picture that you're about to see. I see the North Tower of the World Trade Center with a smoking, gaping hole in it. And I'm thinking, this is, I don't know, is that what a small plane looks like? But this looks horrific. So then I hear we're going to go, and you hear the music and you see the animation, breaking news, and the picture comes up full screen. And now you and I, Jake, and the audience, we're in it together. And I don't know anything. I don't know anything. But because it's full screen, I can just get into it. This just in, you're looking at, a horrific scene. And I think it's those iconic words that really put that video clip on the map. That clip, you've seen it in Hollywood films and documentaries, the Smithsonian, the Museum of News. It is those words, those three words that put that moment on the map. And then I'm turned to my computer and I'm just trying to find out, we're just tap dancing. And I'm just trying to find out, how many people work in the World Trade Center, anything about commuting patterns, anything that I can help give context, because I don't know anything until the control room begins to tell me, toss to Sean Murtaugh, CNN marketing executive in New York. And then we go to him and he gives us the first confirmation that it was a passenger jet, because he was in a high rise with a line of sight from the conference room where he was meeting, and he saw that jet slam into the tower. So, it was just moment to moment, second to second, counting on the team around you. I think a lot of athletes probably use that metaphor, on the field, but that is, you're only as good as the team around you. Working for CNN is a very humbling experience. And I wanted to make clear in the first chapter that this was not going to be the story of a gonzo journalist. It was not going to be my war stories, because if you want to read an extraordinary journalist memoir, there are plenty of contemporary extraordinary journalists who are writing theirs. So I wanted to set that forth, that When News Breaks is really very personal. And so it kind of frames how I think about my career. I think about my career as a big teacher. And what I'm most proudest of is understanding how you face what you think is impossible. So every day the odds worked against me. I only had hours to put an entire story together. That was research, booking the interviews, getting to the interviews, shooting the interviews, screening the interviews, writing the script, going through script approval. Sometimes I only had 6 hours to get all of that done. How is that possible, right? And then how is it possible to do some of the things that I did? Why would I go undercover and put myself in physical danger, and for what reward? It's not like I was going to get paid extra. What was that adrenaline, that drug that drove me forward? And understanding that, its pros and its cons, and the transaction of what you give to what you get, and is that in the end the life worth living? So that's how I think of my career. I don't think of it as I don't tell war stories in my contemporary life. Oftentimes people, when they first meet me, if I'm moving through the world under my married name, they don't know who I am initially. They think I look familiar and they love my voice, which is so kind of them, but they don't think, oh, there's Carol Lynn from CNN. But Google is your friend or your enemy, but mostly it's my friend. And when people find out, that's when they get curious. And so what I'm most proudest of is understanding that whenever I'm discouraged about something, I say to myself, I've done this before, I can do it again. I've overcome odds. I've figured it out. I've learned how to solve problems. And that is what life is for any of us. So maybe it's not the answer you were looking for, but it's very much how I feel about my career. I'm so grateful for like the life skills that it gave me to understand that, you know, I can be humble about the experiences I've had. I can give credit to the teams around me and understand I was nothing without them. And maybe that makes me a better friend today. But mostly it's, you can overcome the odds until sometimes the odds will overcome you. And when that happens, you know, when that metaphor of when news breaks, that you're going to have the resilience inside of you to get through it. You know, you're going to get through the things that you never thought possible, because in big ways and small, we've all done these things. We've all faced circumstances where we wanted something so badly and it was never going to be ours, or we had an incredible career moment, but you know, as time passes, it's only going to mean something to me. You know, it's how I'm present in my life today that matters more. So that's what happens when you spend 2 years writing, you know, asking yourself these questions. You know, why did I do what I did, and who were my biggest influences, and where did that come from? Um, and I'm really grateful for that. And I'm glad to see that readers are having a similar experience when they're reading.